Welcome to Grounded, the show that dives into the news that might have you feeling a bit untethered. Along with our guests, we're here to discuss and hopefully help all of us stay grounded. I'm Maritsa Georgiou, a longtime political journalist, alongside my co host, former U.S. Senator Jon Tester of Montana.
It's great to be with you again, Rich, and have the listeners on board. I will tell you that you're where it's quite warm, and of course, our guest is where it's reasonably warm. It was 8 below 0 when I got up this morning in Montana, and it's winter, man. And it feels like winter. So
I've seen the pictures. I'm in California right now, and when I feel the sunshine out here and knowing I'm going home tonight to that, I think I have about 2 feet of snow on my front stoop. I can't say I'm looking forward to the sudden change.
the weather gives you character and keeps the riffraff out. So it's a good thing, you know.
Well, that's true. That's true. Hey, I am so looking forward to chatting with our guest today. It's former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. I got to know Governor Hutchinson pretty well during my time at Scripps News. We have formed a friendship. He's just a wonderful human being, and I'm so looking forward to our chat with him. And we're going to bring him into the fold in just a little bit. But before we chat with the governor, what do you say we get into some headlines that we're tracking after this weekend?
Sounds good to me. Let's do it. There's
All right.
not like there isn't some things happening here.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to get this pared down to a few minutes here, but we have more layoffs to talk about. Friday, it was reported that hundreds of staff at the National Nuclear Security Administration were fired in this wave of terminations coming out of the Trump administration. And many former employees told ABC that it's a national security crisis. Then AP reported that the administration had somewhat of an about face, tried to bring some of them back. A lot of people are confused. I mean, Senator, we live in a state that houses 150 nuclear missile silos. So, what do we need to be thinking about here?
Well, we got to be thinking about the job these folks are meant to do. And what these guys do in the National Nuclear Security Administration is they build the nuclear warheads, they maintain those warheads, and they make sure those warheads are safe. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about an ICBM or you're talking about an airplane or you're talking about a submarine. The truth is that these are the folks that are in charge of our nuclear infrastructure. There's different folks who make the missiles and the ICBMs and all that stuff, but these folks are in charge of building nuclear weapons, maintaining them, making sure they're safe. Pretty damn important, quite frankly. And I don't care if you're living in Montana, you're living in Arkansas, or if you're living in Florida. This is important stuff. It's important to keep our nuclear a nuclear regimen, whatever you want to call it, up to snuff, so that when we need it, it works, and so, quite frankly, that it's safe, so it doesn't go off when it's not supposed to. And so this is really life and death stuff. And I just now look, they have reversed it, I think. But the problem is the uncertainty in all this. If you're working for this agency and one day you're fired and the next day you're not, and then who knows what's going on, because that's what's happening in just about every one of these agencies right now. What's the incentive to stay on? Uncertainty is not a good thing when it comes to anything in our lives, business, government, whatever. And so it's not very sharp, because the truth is that there are people within the agencies that need to go. I think we can all agree on that. But you got to pre-think this stuff before you do it. If you don't, you're going to create more problems than you're going to solve.
Yeah, let's jump agencies. One close to your heart, the VA, they dismissed more than 1,000 employees late last week. Some staffers reporting chaos there after executive orders. So, what are you hearing?
A lot of uncertainty. Nobody really knows what's going on, because there were, people that were fired, and there's a hiring freeze, and then there wasn't a hiring freeze. There's the Veterans Health Administration and the Veterans Benefit Administration. Both of them are really important. Um, and I think the biggest thing to say, not unlike the previous thing with the nuclear facilities, is that um, people don't know what's going on. And
Mhm.
I can tell you that in many areas of government, people can make more money in the private sector than they can in the government. A lot of these folks are working in the government because they want to help veterans, or they want to make sure this country's safe, or whatever it might be. And it's ultimately going to have some real negative impacts on hiring folks. I got a call from a lady who had been offered a job. She quit her old job. She's due to go on to the VA. She doesn't know if she's going to have a job or not, and she doesn't have a job, her old job, because it's gone. It's not good. And in the VA in particular, after being at war for 20 years, we've got a lot of folks out there with a lot of problems. We need docs, we need mental health professionals, we need nurses, we need administrative folks across the board. That hasn't changed from when I was in the United States Senate. And so, um, like I said, not unlike the others, if we got folks that aren't doing their job, show them the door. But the bottom line is that's not what's happening here. These are blanket dismissals, and then when they take a look at it, oh God, we screwed up. Let's bring some of them back, and and sometimes it's way too late for that, especially when we were short to begin with.
Okay, let's get international for a second. Hopefully we can cruise through this because we want to get to our guest.
Yep.
But over the weekend, a lot of news coming out of Europe. NBC aired an interview with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Sunday, in which he warned about Russia attacking other NATO nations like Poland and Lithuania. He said he wouldn't accept any deal made to end the war without Ukraine having a seat at the table. And then, of course, that comes as French President Emmanuel Macron hosting an emergency EU meeting Monday on this war after learning the EU is also being left out of negotiations. And then we had Vice President Vance basically blasting European leaders, saying the threat he worries most about regarding Europe isn't Russia or China, but the threat from within Europe. So, what do you make of all of this?
Well, man, you laid out so much information right there. I don't know if we're going to have enough time to talk to our guest. What I'm telling you is that uh, everybody needs to be at the table. This impacts the world, and and people don't may not understand this, but the truth is what goes on in Ukraine impacts what's going on in Israel, impacts what's going on in the Pacific Rim, and so it makes sense, especially since the Ukrainians have fought valiantly against a country that invaded them, I might add. So everybody needs to be at the table. The second thing is this: for the Vice President of the United States to say, Russia and China aren't a problem, but your democracies are, because that's what I heard. That is a problem. And this country has always stood for freedom and privacy and democracies, and helping democracies around the world um, be what they are, because dictatorships and taking away people's freedoms and their rights isn't something this country's ever stood for. And so I don't know what the heck they were thinking about, but the folks I know are more concerned about the impacts dictators can have on us than they are folks who were the people of the government, is what it needs to be. So I don't know, man. There's so much stuff that happened at that Munich Security Conference that makes you wonder. But the bottom line is, if President Trump and Vladimir Putin have a deal and they've cut everybody out, I doubt that's going to be a long lasting deal. You got to have people at the table and you got to negotiate. That's what it's about. And they hopefully will do that.
And we did see Marco Rubio kind of walk that back, saying this is just an initial meeting, but we will watch and see what happens. And working on some guests for next week who maybe can tell us a little bit more about what happened in Munich. I'm going to skip over some other headlines because we would love to get to our guests now. And we are primed with enough talking points to chat with former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, who also served as the youngest U.S. attorney for the Western District of Arkansas, served 2 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, was the administrator of the DEA under President George W. Bush, along with being the Undersecretary of Homeland Security for Border and Transportation Security. Woo, there we go. I got it. Oh, and sir, you also ran for president. Just a few things. Great
Well,
to
it's
see you,
great to
Governor.
see you, Maritsa. Senator Tester. It's good to be with you, and thanks for the news briefing. You know, that I'm covered for the day with that.
Hey, it is a pleasure to have you on the show, Governor. And look, you've been in the governor's, you've been in the executive branch, and one of the things that I've been watching is how the legislative branch has kind of been AWOL when it comes to many of the decisions that the executive branch has been doing. Um, you were governor. Is that something that typically happens, or there's supposed to be three co-equal branches of government, and there's checks and balances and all that? It doesn't seem like there's a lot of that going on right now.
Yeah.
Holding different people accountable on decisions that are being made. What's your view on?
Well, first of all, as governor of Arkansas, absolutely, our legislative branch, which was Republican controlled, I'm a Republican, but let me tell you, they kept a watchful eye over me. They did not let me overreach. They made sure their prerogatives were protected, and particularly during the pandemic, if I uh, asserted myself in an area that they thought was their prerogatives, let me tell you, I heard about it. And I understood that because our founding fathers created a separation of powers, and it was designed to have some friction between them. And the friction is good because that tension is what produces good results for the American people. But there's a couple of fundamental points at issue from Donald Trump's standpoint. First of all, whenever you look at internationally, he believes the United States acting alone. And so that's why he doesn't want to partner with Europe. He doesn't want to communicate effectively with our allies. He wants to cut his own deals. And then he wants to seek other people adulation for the deal he just cut. But that's his style. And so that's why you don't see uh, the reach out to the European allies as we look at whether it's Ukraine or whether we look at the Gaza Strip. The other fundamental point is what you're talking about, and that is his view of the executive branch. And part of the news is what yesterday the special counsels, whose firing was overturned by the courts. The Department of Justice announced that they are pursuing this case to the United States Supreme Court. And of course, the law is clear that the special counsel, and he's not a prosecutor type special counsel, he's there to help whistleblowers and other firing and hiring decisions. And but the law says that he can't be fired unless there's some good reason to do it. There's a protection in there. And of course, Donald Trump, uh, through his staff, fired him without any reason being given. And so the court struck it down. They want to appeal that to the United States Supreme Court because they believe all those restrictions that Congress placed on them are unconstitutional, that they have an executive branch right. And it's philosophically, they want to unify the executive branch, be an all powerful uh, president that controls the executive branch without the traditional restrictions. Now, I think that's what they want to be heard at the United States Supreme Court level. People talk about we're in a constitutional crisis. I don't think we are in a constitutional crisis yet. Now, we could be, but right now, the administration is saying that we're going to follow the court rules. We will see if that is true as time goes on. I think they want to get all of this to the Supreme Court. If they get an adverse ruling by the Supreme Court, then all bets could be off. They're going to reevaluate what they want to do at that point. But at this point, the Department of Justice is saying we're going to follow the court decisions, even though they're appealing it, which they have a right to do. It is a mess.
So you say, yeah. So the what would change that for you if the Supreme Court issues a decision and the Trump administration says, "Oh yeah, we are not going to follow that
Well,
decision."
sure, that's a constitutional crisis. I think the more likely crisis would be that if the Ninth Circuit or a particular circuit rules against the administration, they try to appeal it to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court does not accept the case, then I think you could see them evaluate anyway whether they want to follow the restrictions that the district or the circuit court put on them. That will be a potential constitutional crisis. Again, they're saying the right thing. We're going to follow the rule orders of the court. But I know that there's many in the voice in the MAGA world that says, no, we're not going to do that. We shouldn't do that. So we'll see who prevails.
And we're seeing that play out across social media. We had, the JD Vance posts from last week when he was talking about the courts. And then President Trump over the weekend posted something that said, he who saves his country does not violate any law. And I mean, that's something that's attributed to Napoleon Bonaparte, who declared himself an
And what's
emperor.
worrisome about that is that that language from JD Vance, but also the President Trump's tweet that you just quoted, it is it is softening America. It is warning in advance and preparing them for his arguments that he's got the right not to follow the law. And of course, the Supreme Court decision that gave him immunity from prosecution, even at a violation of the law, that's the basis for that tweet. It is very frightful, but that's his view. And I think he is softening America for what could happen and help and trying to prepare them for his views.
Well, I can say this. It's much easier, and I think you can attest to this, if there are no checks and balances, you just do whatever the heck you want. But that's not what the forefathers had in mind, and, it's kind of a pain in the neck. I mean, I used to hear from the governors in Montana when I was in the legislature all the time, and I'd hear from the executive branch in DC too that, the legislature was a nuisance and Congress is a nuisance, but that's not how the forefathers set the program up.
Well, and you're absolutely right. And of course, you know that being in the United States Senate, I know that as a governor, and it has been a surprise to me that whenever you look at the confirmation process, it went very smoothly, but they were tipping the hat and acknowledging the president's victory. But whenever it comes to the spending, that is the area that the Constitution says is uniquely in the legislative branch. And, uh, and whenever you see spending, whether it is the Department of Education or moving money, they are substantially ignoring what Congress has, the restrictions that Congress has put on. The question is when Congress is going to stand up and say enough is enough. And I know many of them as you do, and there are many good people there. I mean, Jon Thune, the majority leader, I went into Congress with him, and he's a good person, but he's up for reelection in South Dakota next year. And so they're all balancing, being on the team versus standing up for legislative prerogative. And there's a line that can't be crossed. And Trump is going to push against that line. That will be the test for the Senate and for the House as to whether they're going to stand up for the legislative branch.
When we chatted a few weeks ago, Governor, you told me, from a legal perspective, that a lot of these executive orders are well lawyered. So, what does that mean as we go forward?
Uh, well, I particularly referring to one of the executive's orders on immigration enforcement. And I read the entire executive order, and and it was well lawyered. I mean, it had caveats in there that all of this executive order is subject to the appropriation actions of Congress, so it's deferential to them. But it also had caveats in there that all of this is subject to the current uh, legal requirements and subject to what the law requires. And so they had the right caveats in there, and so well drafted. The challenge will be not in that, but in the execution. And whether you're talking about moving people to Guantanamo Bay, whether you're talking about rounding up illegal aliens and sending them out of the country, it's going to be those that are caught up in those that actually have a right to assert themselves legally. That's where it's going to be tested, and it's a matter of how it's carried out in practice versus how the executive order is worded, and that will be the essence of the test in court.
Hey, Governor, you're down in Arkansas, and I can tell you that there are folks in Montana that are very, very nervous about the tariffs as they apply to to grains in particular. We're a state that raises very, very high quality wheat that we depend upon exports to really affect our markets in a positive way. Well, what are they talking about in Arkansas as to the tariff? Is um, anybody talking about that? You guys have Walmart down there, and are they concerned?
They are, and they want to make sure that the president and his economic advisors know the cost to the consumer, uh, that how Walmart's going to respond to the tariffs, and that the consumers will have to pay more in the stores. The farmers, they're big supporters here in Arkansas of Donald Trump, and they went through the tariffs in his first term. And to my surprise, they all said, yes, we got to stand up to China. This might be the price you paid. But notwithstanding that, they were very supportive of Donald Trump. I think it's a little bit tougher now because not only are they getting hit on the potential retaliatory tariffs that's going to restrict the sale of soybeans and rice to our foreign countries, but also with the dismantling of USAID, which is a big purchaser of our commodities, they get double hit. So I think that was a curveball to them. But they have a lot of patience. They support the president's agenda by and large, but we have not felt the impact of the tariffs yet. And when it happens, I'll make a prediction in advance that president will give a to all the farmers, just like he did in his first term, and he'll say the tariffs are paying for it. And so it's very misleading, but I think that you will see a payout program for the farmers to compensate them for the losses, because that's a big base of his support.
Well, I think
So let
if
oh,
I'm
go
not
ahead.
mistaken, in the continuing resolution, I'll get this to you. There was an additional $50 billion put into the Department of Agriculture for that very purpose. But most of the people I know, and they're my neighbors, would much rather get their check from the marketplace than from the federal government. That smacks of
Yep.
socialism. Go ahead, Maritza. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. That's good perspective. Let's stay on tariffs for a second because Trump has really lumped the two borders together, the Canadian border and the Mexican border, when talking about, illegal fentanyl imports and tariffs. But there's a really big difference between the problem at the two borders. And, of course, you were at the head of the DEA. You know that. Federal statistics show border authorities seized 21,889 pounds of fentanyl in 2024, and of that amount, only 43 pounds were seized at the Canadian border. So why lump these two countries together on both the border issue and the fentanyl issue?
Well, first of all, it's wrong. The basis in which he uh, asserts a tariff prerogative is that there's a national security issue at stake that gives him the authority. And so for Canada, it's sort of hard to argue. We have some national security concern with Canadians. And so he invoked fentanyl, which is a red herring totally, not really a significant problem what comes from Canada. The biggest challenge is, and it's really heartbreaking to me, Canadians, if we have uh, uh, we need a foreign ally, they're the first ones to sign up. They've always supported the United States from a national security standpoint. Our trade with them, we're intertwined with them. And we're going to be doing damage in the short term, but the regret is that we're doing damage in the long term with harmful relationships in which trust has been destroyed. And that is the greatest concern. So it makes no sense what we're doing to Canada. And it just goes to show that he wants to use tariffs against friends, allies, as well as adversaries, and he's not distinguishing.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's nobody I know that doesn't want to hold China accountable, but there's nobody I know that doesn't want to have good trade agreements with Canada too. I mean, with the softwood lumber and everything that goes across. Because quite honestly, here in Montana, we actually have more connections with our neighbors in the north than we do with folks east of the Mississippi. And so it's really interesting what's going on here. And I don't get the Canadian stuff. I mean, let's sit down and pound our fists on the table. Let's negotiate good trade agreements all across the board. but you don't start out by throwing up tariffs, and there'll be retaliatory tariffs, and then pretty soon costs are going to start going up, and the American people, from my perspective, are going to end up having to pay the bill, whether it's through their taxes or whether it's through the cost of things in the store.
We are really seeing a split here, in a lot of the legal challenges that we've seen come out of some of these executive orders, and we're seeing a lot of blue states team up to file something, and then we're seeing a lot of red states team up to file something. Governor, I mean, in addition to tariffs, we're going to see other issues impacting red states, like cuts to research funding at universities. So, how do you think these governors of red states will toe the line
Great
here?
question. And let me give you a perspective of what's happening here in Arkansas, a red state. First of all, the research funding that you're mentioning has the great potential of impacting our University of Arkansas research, our University of Arkansas medical sciences. So there's always already been a lot of concern, and in fact, it was stopped to begin with and restarted, as the senator pointed out. And so that's going to increase the pressure on our attorney general and our governor to say, Mr. President, we are concerned. Just like the Alabama senator raised some issues about her state and governor. And so there's going to be more pressure there. And I think the defining point will be that if the blue state attorney generals get relief, and the relief is to those plaintiffs and those blue states, and they're getting their research funding, but the red states aren't. That's where there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure going on. But you also see, just a anecdote here in Arkansas, uh, our United States attorney in the Eastern District of Arkansas got an email saying he's fired. And and of course, well, I don't even know all the reasons, but uh, the next day, because the senator called the White House, they reversed that and said, no, that was a mistake. You still got your job. And then you got just yesterday a wonderful lady who was with the Park Service lost her job. And and you can understand the reasoning a little bit because she was extended a job because of the Infrastructure Protection Act and had all of this funding for different programs. So she had a job there. The administration just canceled all of them. Well, you know, there's a personal impact there on this lady that's worked for a year, done a great job, very much needed in our park services here in Arkansas. So there's going to be pressure on our legislators from a human standpoint in representing these people, but also from the funding standpoint for our major institutions.
Yeah, can you expand on the thing you talked about at the very beginning? Because one of my constitutional law professor friends brought this up to me, and these are called universal injunctions. So it actually could backfire on red states if these blue state attorneys general win their cases, right? I mean, is that what you're saying? Like, maybe they're the only ones who feel relief.
That could be. A lot depends upon the wording of the judge's order and circuit that they're in. But, if Arkansas, for example, we're in the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals that does extend up to some blue states. And so, uh, the circuit court or the judge could say this applies to this state and the states that are say they've been injured and it doesn't make it applicable to other states, then that contrast in funding and ruling is going to be uh, talked about. It's going to add pressure, and it's going to cause the red state attorney generals to think, what action should we take? Should we join in this litigation? And obviously, higher education is going to be a part of that, saying, hey, we need help. We need help.
Well, Governor, I will tell you that I'm not much of a professor, but I'm teaching a class at the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago, and I usually have about 35 of the nation's brightest kids that are in those classes. I know you're doing something very similar, teaching a law class at the University of Arkansas. Are kids bringing issues up to you? Are next generation of leaders bringing issues up to you that they're concerned about?
The answer is yes. And as you know, it's really good to be back in the classroom talking to students because uh, it's an exciting time when they see what's happening in Washington. There's a lot to follow, but they're also aspirational. They still want to change the world. They know that they're not cynical. They believe they can make a difference, and and so it's a great conversation. And they come in and in my law school class in Arkansas, there's a good balance of students there. Both pro-Trump supporters and those that are Democrat. But the conversation is good. We're studying separation of powers. We're talking about the power of the executive branch and Congress. And so, uh, when I went to law school, it was during Watergate, and so I was able to watch the fact that Republicans and the president's party was able to stand up for what they believed in, even though it might be contrary to their party's best interest. And I think that's what we're looking for today is people, regardless of party, to say, hey, we need to stand up, and this goes beyond our importance of our country.
Yeah,
And you
I
were
agree with that.
one
I can
per
tell you that I think what's really, really changed between, well, even in the last 20 years, is the amount of money in these races. I think that just skews everything and makes it very, very difficult when you can have one person or one corporation that can fund a campaign against somebody. It really does make it hard.
That's why Elon carries such a big stick right now, the threat of them funding an opposition candidate.
And Governor, you were one of those Republicans. I mean, in 2023, you were one of 2 candidates on the debate stage who didn't raise your hand when asked if you'd support Donald Trump, even if he was convicted. And you said at the time he was morally disqualified for being president again. And then I was at the RNC with you last summer, and you told me about some people coming up to you saying, "Hey, get on board, endorse Donald Trump this time around." Now, you did not, but I'm wondering if you can talk to us about the heavy-handed persuasion that we see within the MAGA movement and how we're seeing it play out in Congress right now and what that looks like moving forward.
Well, uh, it's a great concern. It's real. Whenever you look at the fact that Donald Trump tweets out that Nikki Haley and Pompeo will not be in his administration. Whenever you see him uh, clearly punishing people that uh, did not support him early on, he's very clear about that, and that those marching orders goes to the Department of Justice either through staff or through public comments, and so all of that is a concern in terms of fairness as to how people are treated. From a party standpoint, I'll be speaking this next weekend at Principles First in Washington D.C. It's a uh, organization of leaders that put principles above party is the design of it. And you'd recognize many of them that will be speaking that have not, joined the Trump bandwagon. But then I was pretty impressed that Mark Cuban will be joining that as a speaker. And so, there's some billionaires that are saying, let's look at this more closely. Let's don't jump on the bandwagon. And we all want Donald Trump to be successful. I want him to be successful, and I want to shrink the federal government some, make it targeted. I want to make sure that we have an economy that moves. And some of the things that Donald Trump does, I'm all for. But the how you do things makes a difference. As governor, I could not just move my initiatives through without legislative support and without having them as a counterbalance. And you cannot erase our separation of powers, the fact that our founding fathers said you have to operate as a team, and that's just something that's not within Donald Trump, and that's over time is going to be problematic for the future of the Republican Party.
And it's not an Elon Musk either.
Yeah. Uh, Hey, Elon, I mean, you know, any conservative likes a lot of what's happening in terms of shrinking government some, but boy, it's a heavy uh, ham-hasted, poorly organized effort that they're doing, that the process does make a difference, and they're not paying much attention to that right now.
Yeah, and I would just
And
add to that, if it's gonna stand the test of time, it's better to bring on some folks and get buy-in, and then I think it's much more long term.
No doubt about it. I look at the Department of Education. Ronald Reagan wanted to abolish the Department of Education, but he couldn't get congressional support for it. And if Donald Trump wants to abolish the Department of Education, which you can disperse those functions back to the states, to other departments of government, but get legislative support to do it. That they created it, and that's the balance that we have. And I'm not sure that's going to happen. I think that's going to be another test of his view of executive authority.
when a lot of these cuts are not happening evenly over departments, and we're seeing just entire swaths of employees being wiped out. I mean, we saw more reporting over the weekend that said, there are public health cuts that were done. And I mean, I'm wondering, when you think about your time as governor during the COVID-19 pandemic, going through that, what do you think about things like removing health officials in charge of frontline preparedness and response, or handling the bird flu response right now?
Well, you look at
Vacations.
the measles outbreak in Texas, and uh, you know our health requirements and the threat of a pandemic or an outbreak; those are real. The decisions that we make on immunizations are critically important to our country. And so whenever you're looking both at policy and the voice of leadership, that makes a difference on immunizations and how we look at science, but also in terms of the staff, uh, everything has to be targeted. In Arkansas, when I was governor, we eliminated 3,000 state workers, state government workers, 3,000. That's 14% reduction. Now, we didn't fire anybody. Whenever they left, we evaluated it as to whether we need to keep that position or whether we need to combine it. And through the course of that process, it was a 3,000 reduction. And so you can do it in a more methodical process. It can even work at the federal government because people are supportive of that, but it takes time. It takes a process, but it gives you a sense of fairness, and you're not going to be hurting essential services. Air traffic. I'm going to be flying into Washington D.C. Later this week, and I sure want there to be plenty of air traffic controllers in that tower when I land at Reagan National Airport.
I agree 100%. And all it is it's prioritizing what's important within government, making sure those people that are high priority are on board and that they're not pushed out unnecessarily, because it makes it unsafe across the board, whether you're talking about somebody in an air tower or you're talking about somebody that deals with healthcare or somebody deals with the VA or national nuclear security.
Governor, do you have time for one more question before we let you
One more
cut
question
loose?
sounds great.
Okay, so one issue that is getting a lot of attention with my mom friends in this moment is a lawsuit filed by both your state's AG and ours in Montana and 15 others to declare Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act unconstitutional because the Biden administration added gender dysphoria to what's covered under that definition. Now, many state officials, including yours, they're saying, no, 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 this isn't going to affect your child's 504 plan at school if they have one, if they have ADHD or dyslexia or so on. And Arkansas even published a website saying, this lawsuit does not want to repeal Section 504. But the language of the lawsuit is pretty clear here. It plainly asks the courts to find all of Section 504 unconstitutional. So, with your legal hat on, what do you make of this? What needs to be done?
Well, I haven't studied that specifically, and I have a lot of respect for our Attorney General, Tim Griffin. Uh, and obviously, if someone has gender dysphoria, they need to have access to treatment, and they need to have access to the health care that the law provides for them. Uh, so, I think there's a clear distinction, and has broad support about there being two genders. And I love the distinction between, you know, men and women's sports, and biological males should not compete in women's sports. I signed that law. But as you know, I also vetoed a law that prohibited, uh, uh, you know, certain kinds of health care for those suffering from gender dysphoria. And it was overridden by the legislature. My veto was, and that case is headed to the United States Supreme Court. So this is all going to be dumped in the lap of the Supreme Court, and uh, we'll see where it comes. And to me, it's a matter of limiting government. I I think government should be careful in dictating to parents what is good health care and not. And obviously, whenever children are at risk, you can do that, uh, but which is child abuse. But whenever you're looking at hormonal treatment, if you're looking at counseling, if you're looking at referral to medical experts, you cannot stop. You, there should be a limit as to how much the government can tell parents what to do.
And as far as the language though goes following up, I mean, do you worry if the lawsuit looks to have the entire section 504 declared as unconstitutional? I mean, do you worry about the specific language of that having unintended consequences here to expand beyond gender dysphoria for kids who have ADHD or specialized 504 plans?
Sure, that would be a concern as to how that's applied. And again, gender dysphoria should be treated. They should have the counseling that's needed. Parents should work with the doctors as to determine what the path is. And so you should always worry about the unintended consequences, as you mentioned.
Well, Governor, I just want to say you're my kind of Republican. I appreciate your common sense perspective, I mean, you're the kind of Republican that I grew up with, the folks that are fiscally conservative, that want to see smaller government. And those are the kind of debates, and respect the democracy. And those are the kind of debates I love to have. And uh, Democrat versus Republican, and the lines are pretty damn clear. And I kind of like that.
Well, and I like civil discourse. We need to be, and I think each of you are adding to our civil discourse in our country. We ought to be able to talk about issues that disagree, and go out and feed the cattle together. And so I appreciate, yeah, I'm thinking about you in that cold weather. You got some cattle to take care of. You're going to get cold.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you something. The best thing that ever happened about my service in the U.S. Senate is if you ain't here all the time, you can't have livestock. Otherwise, you count their feet and divide by four because they're upside down. So I don't have any cattle right now. Thank God, because it is colder than hell outside.
Well, great to be with each of you. Thank you for this opportunity today.
You
Thank
bet.
you so much for joining us, Governor. And please let us know when you get up to
I'll be
Montana.
there this fall. Y'all take care.
All right. Sounds
All
good,
right.
man.
We'll see you then. So, John, Senator, some final thoughts after that conversation?
Well, I mean, I really appreciated the governor's common sense perspective, and the point that you bring more people to the table, and it really does make a difference in the decisions you make. I always told the folks in the bureaucracies back in Washington D.C. that we're making decisions on water systems and everything, but money that goes to police departments, all that stuff. I said, "Have you guys ever been to Montana?" Well, a lot of them hadn't. And the truth is, that's the thing about Congress. Those folks come from those districts. They come from those states. They understand, at least they're supposed to understand, the needs of those states. And if you can get the executive branch to listen to you, you can make sure that money is spent a lot wiser and not wasted. And and that's the same thing with laying people off. There may be plenty of reasons to lay plenty of people off within within government, but you got to make sure you're doing the right thing. Otherwise, you're going to create more collateral damage than you're fixing. And that's a big problem. And I can just tell you that I always call them Eisenhower Republicans. They're the folks that are fiscally conservative, that want smaller government, but want to have everybody's opinions in, and then you negotiate, you find common ground, and you do what's right for the country. And that's what I heard out of Governor, and that's what I long for to happen in Washington D.C. That the three branches work and hold each other accountable. The checks and balances are there, and if there's a decision that's made, it's made with one another finding common ground. So that's kind of where we're at. But this next week is going to be another rodeo, I'm sure, and we'll see what comes out.
Yeah, we kind of keep in touch throughout the week on news stories and what has people talking. And I'll tell you, I never thought I'd get so many text messages from Jon Tester.
Yeah, it's a tough life you got, man. I'll tell you.
I've had a lot of feedback though, and so many people really want us to dive into all kinds of issues. We had a woman who wrote us about voting rights and the SAVE Act and what that might mean for married women. I hope we can get into that conversation because that's certainly something I'm hearing about. And then we had another listener write us, John, who said that he worked on your latest reelection campaign, and he said, quote, "It feels like donors are tapped out, elected officials are powerless, and the environment for Dem optimism and enthusiasm is at an all-time low." So he wanted to know what you think about where Democrats go from here. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think after the last election, there's absolutely a realignment. It's happened both directions over the last since probably the beginning of the country. And I don't know that Democrats right now have got their feet under them to know what direction they need to be going. I think they're getting their feet under them, and I'm seeing some of it on some of the shows, Sunday morning shows and stuff, where people step up and they talk about what's important to people, kitchen table issues, so to speak. And I don't know that the Democrats have found that yet. I think they will. I think it takes time, and normally it does take time. And then I think you'll see hopefully better accountability happening in Congress. I think Asa is 100% correct when he says, I want President Trump to be successful, and so do I. I think that benefits everybody, but I don't want him to fail either. And I think some of the things he's doing right now are things that will cause not only him to fail, but the country to fail. And I think that's very scary. And I think when Democrats figure out their role in all this, because they don't control the House, they don't control the Senate, and they certainly don't control the presidency, then I think it'll be a better situation. But it takes time. It just does take time, and hopefully they'll be able to shorten that time frame up as much as possible.
Okay, thank you so much, Senator. And before we go, we want to ask you, our listeners, what's on your mind? What do you want us to dive into? What's keeping you up at night? What questions do you have? You can email us at groundedpcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram and Blue Sky. It's all about staying grounded. We want to thank again the guys at Pearl Jam for letting us use their music to bring in the show and close out the show. And I made a huge error last week and forgot to thank John Warner, who has been helping us with our audio and some of our audio cleaning up. So thank you so much, John. We appreciate you. Another John with a Jon.
Yeah, he spells his name right. Get the H out of there, man. It's good.
Get the H out of there. All right. And thank you for spending part of your day with us. We'll see you next time.